All right. Thanks to you all for joining for the November Club meeting. And I wanted to go. We have a special guest that I'll introduce in just a moment. But beforehand, I wanted to go through a couple of club notes. We haven't met for a couple months, so some of these things are a little bit old. So the holiday daily homebrew competition results were posted, and that was a while back. And I was hoping Kim would be on our call, but she's not. She was the winner of the competition, so congratulations to Kim um,
Kim.
for winning that. That was fantastic. If you did send in beers, I got a response from Alan, the head brewer there, and they mailed back all the score sheets. I don't know, Stu, if you.
Yeah, I just got mine. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's great
Okay.
feedback.
Yeah. So I think that from the first year to this year, that the feedback that I got on those score sheets was it was a little bit more consistent and much improved. So I was really appreciative of that. There was a lot more feedback in terms of what was wrong or right, or the different, or giving you descriptions about what they thought was in the profile of the beer. So that was great. Since Brian's on here, this will be pertinent to him. I saw him post that Gluten-Free Homebrewing has celebrated its 10th anniversary, which is pretty cool, right? So you guys ran a little bit of a special, and I think you have a special deal on Grainfather Black Friday thing, right? Anything you want to say about being in business for 10 years, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. It's weird that we've been around for that long. We started as a Facebook page, and in my memory, it seems like we were a Facebook page for a really long time, and we've only been a business for a really short time. But we were only a Facebook page for a really short time, and we've been a business for most of the time. And things have changed a lot. Things like the malts that we have and the yeast. We're going to talk about that today here shortly. Just the varieties, the information, the knowledge. I mean, things have really, like when I started off as a Facebook page, it was literally because there was no information. There's no centralized information about brewing gluten-free beer. There really wasn't any malt available. And after a couple of weeks of learning to brew, because I didn't brew before I was gluten-free, so I was learning as I went, and I just started the Facebook page because I'm like, everybody that is trying to figure this out is going through exactly what I'm going through. So I just started a Facebook page and shared absolutely everything that I could find. And then that turned into a website and into the store and all that sort of fun stuff. So it's been an amazingly fast journey, and it's amazing how far we've come in a really short period of time, considering conventional beer has been around for thousands of years. And it's pretty amazing when I have I always value my non-gluten-free friends' opinions about the beers that I brew, because they don't know what it's supposed to be like. Like, is it beer like, or is it beer-ish, or it's just beer from most of my friends' perspective. They're like, I wouldn't know what this was. If you didn't tell me it was gluten-free, I wouldn't have thought it was gluten-free. So that's an amazing distance that we've come in a relatively short period of time. So I'm glad to be part of it.
Excellent.
Congratulations.
Cheers. Yeah. Cheers to you, Brian. Excellent. The last item on my list before we get into our guest is that there was and Kim has joined there for her auto to come in. But the other thing was that Stuart had posted earlier in November 7th, I believe, was the Learn How to Brew Day, which I don't know if anyone had taken any newbies under their wings. I know that there was a fascinating idea that Stuart had about a calibration recipe, which I thought was fantastic. I believe you and Bob had both brewed the same beer, and I would like to do that in the near future. Is that what you're drinking right now?
I'm drinking it now. Yeah.
So how did that go? Tell us about what the concept was behind that for just a couple minutes before we get to our guests.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the concept is just having a simple grain bill that most people, and I recognize not everyone, but most people would have access to ingredients for. Hey, Kim. And then with similar ingredients and maybe similar mash regimes and enzymes, we could kind of compare notes in terms of outcomes, and at least know, okay, I should be in this ballpark for mash efficiency I get and the attenuation I get. And if you're not, I mean, there may be some, either your steps are different than someone else's, or again, maybe there's some room for improvement. So it's really just a first attempt to try to figure out what would that ballpark look like. So we picked out, I think it was, I don't have the notes in front of me, but I think it's like 40% or close to 50% pale millet and 50% biscuit 4L, and then a little bit of Vienna. So not quite 50%, but it was like a pound of Vienna, 4 pounds of the other two. It's a little bit one-dimensional, I gotta admit, having brewed it now. Like I like it, but as a drinking beer, I think it might it may need another Mach 2 version of this to step it up a little bit. But the idea was there, so we'll see what Bob thinks.
Excellent. And then if others want to brew that, I know you have a brewer's friend recipe of that, right? So it's
That's right.
definitely
Yeah.
out there for others
Yep.
that want to brew it. Maybe provide the gravity, all the numbers and the details that might be helpful to others to see, hey, what's this beer usually get for PPG and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
right? What
exactly.
enzymes are you using? How does
Right.
that affect the whole process, right? Yeah,
Exactly. That's totally it. Yeah.
fantastic. Thanks for joining, Kim.
Hey.
Oh, you totally missed us. We gave you a shout out for being the winner of the homebrew competition with Holiday. So congratulations to you as the winner of that. Fantastic. Cheers. Do you want to tell us about your beer real quick? What the winning recipe was?
So chocolate vanilla ale. It was basically I mashed for about half an hour of just flaked quinoa, and then it was mostly an extract beer. I was actually really surprised because I haven't been brewing that long, but it did taste really good. So
Excellent. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And you were supposed to have taken a trip out there, and did that get the COVID kibosh, or
it did get the COVID kibosh. So I'm a little bummed about that, but maybe another time.
Nice.
I am gonna do a brew with JP on next weekend.
Oh, cool. Nice.
We're gonna do a side by side. He's gonna use his mash and boil, and I'm gonna use my new Brewzilla and make something.
Down in McMinnville?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Excellent. That sounds fun.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Kim. So we have a special guest today, Matthew Peetz. So did I get that right? Did I say
yeah, that's good.
AKA the Yeast Whisperer, which I love that. That's awesome. And Matthew is from Propagate Labs, and I could read through this whole bio that you have on your website, but I guess it's probably just best for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Propagate Labs, and kind of your story, how you got from your beginning journey as in regards to yeast and where you are today. So just I'll hand it over to you. And thank you for joining, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys as well. But yeah, my name is Matthew Peetz. I own and operate Propagate Lab. I've been working in the beer industry for about a decade now. I did my master's work at CU, and my advisor at the time was really interested in beer, and we were working with yeast in the lab, and I kind of got the homebrewing bug at that point. I started homebrewing, and then I tell people my only employable skill is growing yeast, and so kind of every job I've had since then has had something to do with that. So I did biofuel research for a little bit. I did some cancer research with yeast, and then have worked at a couple different yeast propagation companies, and am now doing Propagate Lab. So we're based in Golden, Colorado, which if you're not familiar with that, it's a little west of the Denver metro area. We have been open since 2018, and at this point grow yeast for 200 plus breweries, mostly in the Denver metro area, but kind of spread all over. Right from the get-go, we were doing yeast for a sake company, Colorado Sake Co. And they wanted gluten-free sake yeast. So we started doing that, and then that got me connected with Alan at Holidaily, and things kind of have spiraled since then. So we do grow a bunch of yeast on, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but normally we grow yeast on malt extract, which obviously has gluten in it. But for those customers, we grow everything up in sorghum extract, so that it doesn't have the gluten that they're looking to avoid. So I just have a couple slides for you guys. This is kind of my general homebrew presentation. I think these are all things probably homebrewers don't know a ton about, and hopefully will be interesting to you guys. And then you can feel free to ask me any questions you have about this stuff, or just kind of general brewing information, if that sounds good to you guys.
Yep, sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. So here is just some information about yeast. The first thing I tell everybody is brewers make wort, yeast makes beer. So it's kind of your job to prepare a healthy wort for the yeast to grow in. So it's going to need to have all the right nutrients, which is certainly a challenge if you're brewing gluten-free. It needs to have the right sugar composition, and then your job is just kind of to control the yeast as it ferments it so that you get the flavor you want. In case you don't know what yeast is, it's a single-celled fungus. This here is a picture. How do I pull up the? Let's see. This here is a picture of yeast. It's 2 yeast cells. This here is the mother cell, and this is what we'd call a daughter cell. And that's how they reproduce. So they reproduce by budding. It'd be like if you grew a little child on your shoulder and it got bigger and bigger, and when it was big enough, it fell off and became its own person. That's essentially what yeast is doing. And then every time that happens, it leaves one of these things. This is called a bud scar on the mother cell. So you can actually tell how many times it's reproduced by how many bud scars it has. And eventually it just all gets covered in bud scars, and it kind of starves to death and dies. But they think yeast evolved on the skin of fruit, and it evolved this strategy called make, accumulate, consume. And so in the natural environment, yeast's competitor is bacteria, and bacteria grows really fast. Bacteria can double about every 20 minutes, and yeast takes 120 minutes to double. And so, you know, if you have 2 hours in that time period, you can go from 1 bacteria to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32. And in that time period, you would have only gotten 1 yeast cell. So 32 kind of versus 1. And so yeast had to come up with some strategy to try and compete against that bacteria and get as much yeast or as much sugar for itself. And so for whatever reason, yeast evolved the ability to produce ethanol, which is alcohol. And pretty much their strategy is if they're at a pizza party with a bunch of bacteria, they're going to poison all the pizza so all the bacteria dies. And so they just poison everybody else that's competing for sugar. All the bacteria dies. And then yeast can actually go back and eat that ethanol. Yeast has to have a ton of oxygen present to do this, so it doesn't really happen in our beer. But the reason yeast is making alcohol is so that it can go back and eat it later. This is in part due to the Crabtree effect, where yeast makes alcohol kind of no matter what. So that's that. So in 1857, Louis Pasteur discovers yeast. At the same time, he does some math, and he finds that for every unit of sugar, you get 46.3% CO2, 48.4% ethanol, and 5.3% cell mass. If you do the math, that equals 100%. It turns out the little error in each one of these measurements is thousands of other flavor components: esters, aldehydes, phenols, ketones, acid. So it gives beer its flavor. if you could just go to the grocery store and buy malt extract, hop extract, and Everclear and pour them together and get beer, Coors and Budweiser, they would do that. If it was that simple that you could just combine all the ingredients, people would do that, but you can't. And it's because during fermentation, the yeast makes all these little additional flavor components, most of which are measured in the 100 parts per billion. And those have just a huge flavor impact on the final beer. And so it's why, you still have to ferment beer. You can't just pour all the raw ingredients together. Yeast eventually gets added to the German beer purity law. If you guys have heard of the Reinheitsgebot, the rules were originally written as just malted grains, water, and hops because people didn't know about yeast. They really had no idea what made beer ferment. But eventually, after Louis Pasteur discovers yeast, the Germans go back and add it to the purity law. And then for most of history, we've not brewed with single isolates of yeast. In fact, probably the first time beer was produced with a single yeast strain was in the 1890s at Carlsberg Brewery. Everything previous to that would have been some kind of a mixed culture. And so, now this is the norm, but for most of the history of brewing, it has not been. Yeast's scientific name, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Saccharomyces is Latin for sugar fungus. And then if you guys have heard the Spanish word for beer, which is cerveza, the Latin word is cerevisiae. They're pretty similar. And so yeast is literally just called sugar fungus for beer. And while the rest of this information would be true for a wort produced out of barley, it's certainly not true for you guys. So yeast likes to eat glucose, maltose, and maltotriose. If you guys are using mostly sorghum or buckwheat or millet or something like that, all these sugars are going to be a little bit different. And so when we grow up yeast for you guys, we really try and do it it's obviously got to be in something that's gluten-free, but we're not growing it on just sugar, like table sugar or dextrose sugar, which would be cheaper. We still want to do it in something like sorghum so that the yeast sees the same sugars you guys are going to present it with. Otherwise, when you dump the yeast into your wort, it's not prepared to eat these sugars and it just doesn't really do anything. It stalls out and it takes a long time to start fermenting. And then this is a picture of how we grow our yeast. So if you guys happened to be at the lab or something like this, we would walk you through it. I stole this slide off of the White Labs website, which is why it has White Labs products on it. I have worked at BSI, which is the Brewing Science Institute. They are one of the largest producers after White Labs, but they don't do anything for homebrewers, so most people have never heard of them. I know the guy who owns Imperial Yeast, and he came from Y Yeast. So, and I've talked to him quite a bit. So I know at least, White Labs, Propagate, BSI, Imperial, Y Yeast, we all do this same thing. There's really only one way to grow yeast. And it starts here. We've got everything stored at -80 degrees Celsius in a cryogenic freezer. These are the freezers people are trying to get for the COVID vaccine that are ultra cold. So if you take ice and put it in this freezer, it warms up the freezer. Like this thing is so cold. It's just absolutely really cold. We streak the yeast out on a plate so that we get single colonies from it. We repeat that step again. This makes sure that when we start growing yeast, it's all genetically identical. And so we just streak it out. We take one little colony off this. All those colonies are clones of one another. We streak it out one time for good measure, select a colony again so that we know they're all clones of one another. Throw it up in a stir flask. This is something you can do at home. And then we dump it into a yeast propagator. And this is nothing sexy. It's literally just a brewer's stainless steel fermenter. The difference is we've got an air stone stuck in the bottom that's going to bubble a bunch of air into this thing. And then the way we do it is we fill it with sterile water and we make up a concentrate that we're going to stick in here. And that concentrate contains, normally we use malt extract, but if we're going to grow it up to be gluten-free, we're using sorghum extract that we get from Brice. a mixture of other nutrients. This is kind of like everybody's secret sauce. We sterilize that and we chuck it in here, and then we just blow a ton of air in here so that the yeast grows and replicates. It takes about 2 days for the yeast to consume all the sugar in there, at which point we turn on the cooling jacket and give it 1 more day to flocculate to the bottom. Then we literally just harvest it out into a container. It takes about 2 more days for QC, and then we're able to ship it off. And so this whole process, these plates each take about 1 day. So we're looking at, 7 to 8 days to grow pretty much any yeast strain we want and ship it out. This is a look at the metabolism of yeast and all the different cool things it can produce. But it's a lot easier to understand this if you look at it in a table, which is what we have here. The 2 major flavor components that yeast produce are esters, which are produced with esterification, and fusel alcohols, which are going to be a number of components, but they generally are going to taste spicier and have some heat. Yeast also produces phenols, and the process for that is fairly similar to fusel alcohols. But what this table here is it's kind of all the levers you as a brewer can manipulate to produce the beer you want. So with the whole brewers make wort, yeast makes beer, these are how you make the yeast make what you want. And so in this table, if you increase anything in this column, this is how it affects esters and fusel alcohols. And so a good example of this, the best example of this, is a Hefeweizen. You can have a Hefeweizen that has a bunch of clove in it, which is like obviously a spicy flavor, or you can have a Hefeweizen that has a bunch of banana isoamyl acetate, which is an ester. And one of the breweries we work with that does a really good job of this, Prost, and they've won several GABF medals. They take their Hefeweizen strain and they want to have a bunch of banana. And so they use all the levers they can to make more banana. They don't aerate it, right? So by decreasing the aeration, you increase the amount of esters. If you increase the aeration, you would decrease esters. They ferment at a warmer temperature. They ferment with less head pressure. And the way they do that is instead of fermenting in a vertical fermenter, they've got lager tanks that are horizontal. And so they ferment in a horizontal tank so that the pressure pushing down on the beer is less. And then they underpitch the yeast. So instead of adding the suggested pitch rate, they pitch at 25% of what's suggested. And so they've used as many of these levers as they can to get more banana out of that yeast strain than you normally would. And so you can certainly do the same at home. If you brew a beer and it's too fruity, you should go back and look at, did I ferment it too hot? Did I not add enough oxygen? Did I underpitch? And likewise, if you ferment a beer and it's too spicy or you want it to be more estery or whatever, these are really easy things you can go change on your own at home to kind of fine tune the product. So that's my brief little presentation for you guys. What questions can I answer for you? What else would you guys like to know?
Yeah, I don't know. Anyone else have questions?
I got lots of questions, but
Yeah.
I can be patient.
Go ahead, Stuart. Why don't you start?
Well, so Matthew, it's great. Like, first of all, I think it's fantastic that you and Brian have teamed up here to give us some liquid yeast options. That's a huge change in the gluten-free brewing, at least in the home brewing world. So thank you both for that. I guess the question that comes to my mind is, and I appreciate the steps that you're taking us through on propagating in a gluten-free environment, but why do you think what are the barriers, I guess, to doing that? Why aren't there more labs doing it? Is it the challenge of just changing over to a different medium, or the sterilization process? I'm just curious what your perspective on that is.
Yeah, I mean, we basically have to run 2 setups, which is obviously a burden. And so we've picked up a couple more sake companies because they're, for whatever reason, sake is kind of like in vogue right now. And they've said that other producers just aren't willing to run, like another, basically media train to be able to make up the media to feed the yeast. So
Is that specific to that? So the aerator, the picture you showed with the diagram, the big basically fermenter or whatever you had, is that, do you have a separate one of those, or are you using the same equipment for both all your yeast, or how does that work within your facility?
when we make up the sugar concentrate that we feed the yeast, that's all done in a separate setup. But then they do go into the same fermenter that normal yeast would have been in before, but it gets, it goes through caustic rinse, acid rinse, sanitizer rinse, sterile water. So it seems like that gets all, any of that gluten out of the system. So
Yeah.
So when you guys did you had like 5 or 6, I can't remember how many different strains that Brian, you had available through the store. Did you do that all in kind of sequence, that you had all these different gluten-free strains coming through, and then basically shut out the other gluten containing strains for a little while?
yeah, I mean, we tried to do those back to back to back, which is one of the reasons it takes us forever to like get you stuff, Brian. Sorry. It just takes, it's pretty much, and then if we've got another customer that's ordering sake yeast or something like that, it just kind of gums up the works. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we don't want to make anybody sick. And hopefully I don't think we have. Alan at Holidaily tests everything when we deliver it, and whatever test he's using shows that it passes. So
What about so cost is a big issue. I'm sure everyone is cost conscious, but especially the gluten-free beer brewing community. I'm sure Brian could tell you all about that, but a lot of things are super expensive, grain costs. So the dry yeast is kind of appealing because it's, way less expensive and it's just already gluten-free, but we don't get a lot of as much selection as like a regular barley brewer, because there's just not that like liquid yeast pipeline. But what about things like reusing the yeast for several different beers? Is that something? How many times can you reuse a yeast before it's past its prime?
if you're really clean, if you were sure that your beer was fermented without any bacteria or wild yeast, you'd be able to reuse it probably 10 to 15 times. But if you get even a single cell of bacteria or wild yeast in it in that first batch, it's going to get worse every time you reuse it. I think the better way of doing it, and this is what I did when I was a home brewer, is you could buy just a single package of it and put it in some sterilized container that you can safely reopen and close again, and then just grow up your own yeast each time in a stir flask or something like that on your own gluten-free media. And you just open the package of yeast you bought, pour a little bit out, put it back in the fridge. It's going to stay good in the fridge for 3 to 6 months. Grow up what you need, pitch it into your beer. And that each time, then you're going to have nice, healthy cells. It's going to ferment vigorously, and it's certainly going to cut down on the risk that something gets into your yeast somewhere else.
This is where we run into a lot of issues with the gluten-free homebrew market, is that, gluten-free beer is a niche. Gluten-free homebrewers is a niche of a niche. Liquid yeast is a niche of a niche of a niche. And this is what we oftentimes run into. So we could, in the future, if this is only our second year doing it, we really do want to get the price down. But right now it's just so expensive, relatively speaking, for the home brewer. But it's only our second year attempting it. So if we can actually get some traction, we fully intend to sell it as long as people are buying it. And if we can find ways to make it less expensive for the home brewer. And this is the thing that we're always trying to figure out, like using Ceramix and Nandia Pro. Well, that's going to bring the price point down, which is a barrier to some people because we know we discourage people from entering into gluten-free home brewing just because of the price shock. So if we can bring that overall price down, that's going to, more people are going to brew. It's just better for the community. It's better for the industry. But we have to get to that point where we can, you know, get those cost savings to attract more people to buy the product. I'm really happy. You know, last year, I really think of last year as just like a test period to work out the kinks. And your repackaging from the bottles to the pouches actually addressed a lot of those issues because the leaking issue. And this year, I checked the weather to where I was shipping the yeast to, and I contacted a few of my customers. I'm like, you know, you guys are kind of, it's still kind of warm in Phoenix. You might want to wait a few weeks. So like, I'll hold on to your yeast, and when like the weather is cooler, I'll ship it to you. Because we had packages arrive at customers' doors, and just the ambient temperature was really warm, and the bottles would swell, and without it being a fully sealed unit, you know, that pressure just pushed past the cap pretty easily. So we worked out a lot of kinks last year. I'm really encouraged going forward this year and in the future as well. So that's my little soapbox.
Yeah, it's a challenge. We've started shipping homebrew yeast more broadly, and you know, you can get dry yeast for like $1.50 or $2, right? So that's what people have been taught that product is worth. But I certainly can't grow it for that cheap, right? But then people want you to be able to ship it ground. And so, you know, they want to pay $10 for you to ship $2 worth of yeast. And then if something goes wrong, you know, you're responsible for it. So it's been a challenge. You know, you would not ship a dog 3 days. You wouldn't ship a box of chickens 3 days, but people want you to be able to ship yeast 3 days, even though it's, you know, it's still the option. If I put it in the container and it doesn't swell, that means it's dead. Nobody wants that. You know, they want it to be alive when they get it. And so it's a challenge. It's been a real challenge, you know, to try and ship stuff cold anywhere in the whole country at the slowest possible pace that UPS will do it, because that's cheapest.
Yeah, I definitely thought that the way it was, I got the just a shout out to both of y'all. I got the farmhouse yeast, and then also the Brett, one of the Bretts, and the packaging was awesome. I mean, it was it was very thoroughly done, and the packaging was nice. And just a shout out to the farmhouse yeast that I used. I was used to like a Belle Saison taking forever, and this thing was, I mean, it went as fast as like a Kvike or something like that. It was insane, right? So, and I'm drinking that beer right now, and it's delicious. So
If you
And
can
all,
have
all
a
the
favorite
things that
yeast
we have to
strain,
do
that's
to ship that yeast to you, the insulator package, the little ice pack that we put in it, timing like the shipping and everything. You know, if we can buy those things in much larger quantities, then that price comes down for everybody. But right now we're just kind of like doing trial runs. I'm buying like the minimum amount of everything, which just inflates the price. So yeah, first started selling enzymes, I was buying like a box of bottles, and I think there's, I don't know, some odd random amount, like 38 bottles in a box or 48 bottles, whatever random amount. And now I'm buying, you know, I think the last time I bought bottles, I bought about 1,500 or 2,000 bottles, you know, and that's going to allow us to get it to be a little bit more
scale.
Yeah, and I think Matthew, you were saying something about the farmhouse yeast. I had read through when Brian and I had kind of talked about the different yeasts, and he was kind of trying to get some feedback on what to carry and whatnot. And I was reading all the descriptions, and they all started to sound really good. But there was several that kind of jumped out at me, like that farmhouse, and then the Brett's, because we, as gluten free, we really never got that opportunity to use those types of bacteria. So, and I don't know if there's other ones that jump out to you as like those are the really like the top three in your lineup that you feel like are most popular or may even make the best beer. Do you have any kind of preference as to what's in the catalog that you have?
I mean, my favorite, I really like Belgian style beer. That farmhouse is my favorite yeast strain. That can be a thing. Um, for the most, what we sell the most of to homebrewers is still California ale yeast, which is kind of disappointing because that's, almost as boring as you could get.
Yeah.
But we also do a bunch of what we call hazy IPA, or we've got a juicy IPA. A lot of homebrewers are making really hoppy beer. And I don't know if that's true in the gluten-free homebrewing community, but
Yeah.
It's pretty popular, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think some of those strains that you're talking about, like the farmhouse strains, are pretty unusual, and it's easier to find a saison yeast than it is a Brettanomyces, of course. But it is kind of cool to have, in your catalog. I know you got like 5. I don't know how. I think we had maybe one of those options through gluten-free homebrewing, but it's awesome. It's great to have the variety.
I think it's really amazing that how much of a role yeast plays in gluten-free brewing today, because thinking about like that 10-year journey, when you're brewing beer early on, it was disappointing that you couldn't get different yeast strains, but it wasn't really all that relevant because it was all about how much hops and how many herbs can I add to this thing to cover up the like weird flavors that I was experiencing. And now 10 years later, we're trying to find very specific strains to really elicit a certain flavor profile from the ingredients that we're using. And to do that in a 10-year period is just absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Matthew, so I got a question just to segue around, shipping and the challenges around that. You were talking a little bit about even doing starters and things like that. Would you recommend that generally for your liquid yeast? Is that something that we should be doing, or does that depend on the strain and the type of beer we're making?
If you're brewing just 5 gallons and it's like 16 Plato, which is 1060, 1064 specific gravity. If you're below that, you're going to be fine. But if you're now trying to do 10 gallons or it's a higher gravity beer, you're going to want to make a starter. Or if you're making a lager, that would all be good.
Right.
I had a question on, this is one of my bullet points that we didn't get to, so I'll throw it out here, is about emerging trends and different yeasts within, I for instance, it's not a liquid yeast, but I use that, they call it Philly Sour, the Lallemand, I think it's Lechinacea thermotolerans, which was supposedly isolated from like some tree in a graveyard in Philadelphia, right? So do you, I don't know if there's emerging trends. I thought it was interesting too. There was a big thing on, I think, that Milk the Funk, where they were talking about, I think that Lallemand, I'm not sure if this is true, they were trying to like patent the yeast variety or something crazy. I don't know if that's true or not, but is there anything that you see, or do you guys do things like that? Do you go out and try to harvest wild yeast, and are you just too busy with everything else to do stuff like that?
Yeah, we've got one of my employees, Brandon Norton, who's worked at a number of breweries. That's like his hobby, is he goes and collects yeast from weird places. So we do have, and we're trying to get all those sorted through and online, because he has, I think, 87 at this point.
Wow.
And most of them are stuff nobody's ever going to want to use, but some of them have some interesting flavors, or you could put them in a barrel and give them some time. I think brewers have kind of maxed out a lot of the other ingredients. Like people have just put so many hops in beers at this point that there's no, you can't, that frontier has been thoroughly explored. You can put 10 pounds per barrel of hops and whatever, that they've pushed the flavor profile that way as much as possible. And so now people are going to come back to yeast and say, how do we push the flavor profile with this ingredient, which is cool for us. A lot of people are using the quake yeast that ferments at close to 100 degrees, and you can, there are breweries that have a beer in a can within a week of brewing it, which is awesome for them because it basically doubles the capacity of their brewery. And so that it is cool that that's like a frontier people are starting to pay more attention to.
So does your yeast vault just continue to grow with new samples? You just decide to pull those out as the demand for those fluctuates?
Yeah, we are trying not to play like gatekeeper and just
Mm-hmm.
make them all available as we can, and people can figure out what the heck they want to do with them. Like we have,
Right.
I think, 17 different quike strains. A lot of them are really similar, but that's my opinion on it. And brewers seem to have their own opinion or pick one that they like better than the others. And so I don't want to be the gatekeeper for that. I'd rather just, you can do whatever you want with these things. So
I was reading, I had a question on like, I read your, kind of about the Propagate Labs, and it was interesting. It sounded like that you were, in a position with, I forget the name of the previous company, but it became kind of too big and you were doing stuff you didn't really want to do. And that's kind of why you started. So you are worried about like this Propagate becoming so big where you don't get to do what you really love, and it sounds like you like to do the whole yeast side of things and not obviously like payroll and things like that, right? So is that a worry about getting too big, or you want to keep it small?
I think I've done a better job of hiring qualified people this go around that can do a lot of the yeah, I don't want to turn into a babysitter again, I guess, that, is making sure everybody's doing their correctly. So I want to be able to do this kind of stuff where, you guys are obviously all passionate about making beer, and that's the fun part of this job. So
Yeah.
Well, thanks for helping us do it, man.
Yeah, congratulations, Kim. I hear your beer turned out really well. One of my my employee, Brandon Norton, was over there at Holiday Lee judging them. So, or I think
seriously?
actually they sent them all home with the beers, maybe, and they did them at home or something like that. So,
With COVID, probably, yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I got some good notes from Brandon. That was much appreciated.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Hopefully,
I think
hopefully
we
he
all
was
did.
kind.
Yeah, because they mailed Alan and mailed all of the score sheets back to us, and yeah, Brandon's comments were really good. So
Good.
yeah, much appreciated. Yeah.
All I saw was Yeast Lab. I didn't realize it was Propagate Lab.
Yeah, because you guys, Matthew was saying that you guys are right next to where Holiday Lee is located, right? Or real close.
Yeah, we're maybe 5 or 10 minutes from Holiday Lee.
Cool.
Is that a question for you on like what I mean, obviously golden like cores, right? I mean, is there a reason why you decided to locate there? Is there a lot of breweries right in that area, or is it just
It was close to my house, and there was a
close to your
building
house?
available. So. But yeah, there are a lot of breweries there. A lot of really good breweries too. Cannonball is not far from us. They won 3 medals at JBF this year.
Nice.
They've won a medal every year for the last 5 years. They are very, very good. But yeah, Holiday Lee's right there. Yeah.
Hey, can I ask a question going back to the yeast washing thing?
Yeah.
So my name is Derek, by the way. I'm
Hi, Derek.
on I've never been to one of these before, so I'm also introducing myself to everyone else.
Hey Derek,
Hey,
thanks for joining.
Hey,
Yeah,
Derek.
thanks for sending me the link. I'm Chaps on the Homebrew Talk.
Nice.
You had mentioned like getting a packet. So I live in Hawaii, so obviously shipping is of concern because trying to get stuff here, nothing ever ends up cold. Ryan worked with me last year on he shipped mine specially, and I just paid extra for extra shipping. But you mentioned like take a little bit of the yeast thing, the liquid yeast, and then put it back in the fridge. But then earlier you said that you keep your yeast at -80 degrees Celsius. So why wouldn't we store our yeast in the freezer as well? Obviously it's not -80.
So we have to add some preservatives to the yeast to be able to freeze it like that. Otherwise it would all die. Like when you freeze water, it expands. And essentially what it does is it turns into like a bunch of knives inside the cells and just slices them up. So we add glycerol to prevent that from happening. But we're trying to keep that yeast dormant for decades. I mean, we want to be able to go back to the freezer 20 years from now and be able to recover that yeast, which I assume is probably not your goal, right? You want to be able to use it for a year or something like that. And so refrigeration temperature is just fine for what you're doing.
Would freezer temperature make it last longer, or would that destroy
No,
the
there's
yeast?
no glycerol. You're going to kill it all. And the other big thing is like your freezer at home probably defrosts, which is really bad for the yeast. It really needs to be colder than that, and it has to not fluctuate.
Gotcha.
And so, it's at -80. If the door is open for more than 2 minutes, it alarms, and you've got to close it because it's got to not. It really has to stay at -80. It can't go up and down and up and down for the process to work.
So if you're doing the refrigerator thing, then I think you said 3 years, 6 months or something like that. So how long do you think like you could realistically keep a portion of liquid yeast in the refrigerator and expect it to still be good to go? And
If you're gonna make a starter with it, I think you've got 6 months from the day it was packaged, and so that's part of it, right? Like if Brian's had it for 2 months, now it's only going to be good for 4 more months in your hands.
Okay.
Yeah, but you should have 6 months.
Okay.
Matthew, is that true for the Brettanomyces as well? Would you make a starter from those?
Yeah, I'd probably make a starter. That's how I would always do it. The more active the yeast is, the better chance it's going to ferment your wort right away, which means the less likelihood something else is going to grow in there.
Yeah. Right.
And it's obviously time and effort and money to make a starter, but if you've already invested $50 in ingredients, it's like really good insurance policy to make sure that everything works the way it's supposed to.
Maybe a follow-up techie question on the Brett. I like your table on the variables for getting more esters out of yeast. If you're trying to maximize maybe the fruity component of Brettanomyces or conversely the funky components, any quick tips on what we should do if we're trying to do that?
Yeah, so the esters are a combination of carboxylic acids and alcohols. So if you don't have either of these precursors, you can't make those fruity flavors. The alcohol precursor will be increased by a warm fermentation. And then this reaction is sped up with heat. And so for every 10 degrees warmer it is, this reaction happens 2 times faster. And so if you want to get those fruity flavors, temperature will be the trick. So whether you want to ferment with just Brett, or if you want to ferment with an ale strain and then add Brett, temp is going to be your friend in terms of getting more of those fruity flavors out of there.
That's an interesting, sorry, I don't mean to hijack this, but what's your thought about co-pitching? I know like for that Philly sour, I watched this whole like hour-long presentation on YouTube about how you don't want to co-pitch with that yeast because it'll get out competed by other ale yeasts. But with the Brett specifically, is it okay to co-pitch with Brett, or what's your recommendation when it comes to like co-pitching yeasts?
It depends a lot on what you want, right? So if you co-pitch, like let's say you did 50-50, some ale strain and some Brett, you've cut the Brett's ability to make stuff by 50% because now it's got somebody else it's got to share all its resources with. And so if you're trying to dial down the Brett flavor, I would just use less percentage of it. If you could do, I see people do 50-50, 90-10. Some people ferment it all the way they can with an ale strain and then add the Brett. You can certainly ferment just with Brett. Brett also biotransforms some components. So specifically, it likes to turn 4-VG, which is a phenol, into a bunch of different flavors. So it can turn it into everything from like sweaty goats, like barnyardy type aromas, into stuff like pineapple. And so if you increase the amount of this precursor, you end up with more of those final components. And the main producer of this is yeast that have this gene called POF plus, all of which are Belgian strains. So if you're trying to get more of that barnyard character, like if you've ever had the beer Orval, it has a bunch of this like Band-Aid phenol barnyard thing going on. You would have to have a ale strain in there that makes that precursor. So it's like there's just so much stuff going on, which is what makes it so cool. But if you want to really produce a bunch of flavors with Brett, I would use probably just Brett so that it gets all the resources it needs. It gets the greatest chance to produce those flavors.
Okay.
So now I'm going to re-hijack that question, or hijack it a second time and ask: would you ever consider making blends like a PDO lacto Brett blend? On a gluten-free medium.
If enough people wanted it, we would do probably something like the Y yeast as a Roselaire blend.
Yeah.
And it's supposedly, my understanding is actually Peter Buchart, who was the head brewer at New Belgium, but brewed at Rodenbach beforehand, brought basically like a jar of their inoculum back, and somehow Y yeast ended up with it. But yeah, it's a mix of PDO, lactobacillus, and several brewers' yeast strains and Brettanomyces. We could put that together if enough people are interested in it.
I think that would be an awesome, I don't know if it's a 2021 goal or not, but just back to Brian's point about cost effectiveness, and maybe not a ton of us, but enough of us, I think, are trying to do these mixed fermentations, and we end up getting all the different component parts. And it'd be nice if it was all in one package too, for at least for some of our brews. That'd be great. Love it to see it.
That could be our next calibration brew, Steve.
There you go. A mixed culture calibration.
Any other questions for Matthew while I got him here? We're coming up on the top of the hour.
I had one. Just how did you end up with? Maybe this is a question for Brian, because I'm not really sure how it went from Propagate to Brian to us. But how did you end up with these 4 liquid yeast choices? Because they seem somewhat random to me.
Well, this year we did a poll through Zero Tolerance to get feedback.
Yeah,
like what
I saw that poll.
Want.
Was it directly just the top 4, or was there some other?
There were other varieties, but they sold out faster. And we bought different amounts of different yeast strains. So,
gotcha.
like I'm sure Matthew would be happy to sell anybody yeast directly. The problem is that there's minimums, and do you really want to end up with like a half dozen of the same yeast? And the shipping for that one batch, as opposed to the entire batch of various yeast strains that he sends me, he overnights that to me. So overnighting 5 vials of yeast or 25 vials of yeast is relatively the same. So yeah, we did a poll, and I think I did it in our newsletter too. And based on the little bit of experience that we had from last year, we ordered more of some and less of others, but we have minimums that we have to buy. And the ones that are still up on the website, I honestly kind of thought I'd be sold out of them and I'd be placing my next order already. But I think that the dry yeast versions that have come out in the last year kind of maybe slow down the rate that I could sell the hazy and the what is it, the hazy and the
Juicy.
I forgot.
Juicy.
Yeah, the juicy, thank you, and a couple other ones. So I think that might have attributed to like, hey, if I can get a dry for $4 or I can get this for $12, I'll just go with the dry and save myself a few bucks. But you're not getting the same yeast, you're not getting the same beer, you're not getting the same results. So lessons learned, maybe not going forward, not knowing that we could maybe offer more varieties and not have as many in stock and go through the varieties quicker. It's a learning process for us too. So yeah.
And Matthew, you guys sell the barley based just single packets for like what, $10 per yeast variety. So the costs that Brian's offering from is not that much different for all the kind of trials and tribulations you have to go through to get that. But yeah, I mean, from my experience using that farmhouse, it was amazing, right? So definitely it's for a few extra dollars to try something that you're not normally going to get, especially for the strains that I would not normally be able to get. It's definitely worth it, right? For me, but
Go Propagate.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's great to have the
Awesome.
option.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
yeah, thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us. This is great stuff. Really appreciate it. So, anyone got any last questions? No. All right. So next month, I think we're just gonna do like a just club only online meeting and not have any kind of super intense diagrams with that have anything to do with yeast cells or anything like that crazy. We'll keep it simple. Everyone can have a beer in their hand, and we'll just see how fast we can chug our 10% beers, right?
Oh.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving if you're in the U.S., and we will see you next month.
Hey,
Thanks a lot.
Stuart, can I ask you a question before or after?
Yeah, you bet. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Talk to you later. Cheers.